Hey friends, in this lecture we're going to be talking about what's called post-hoc analysis. And whenever I advise students on how to do a good job with their thesis, whether it be the writing aspect or the defense aspect or design, doesn't matter. I always tell them to plan on doing post-hoc analysis, and if you do it well, it's a really good way to try and impress your committee. Many of the questions the committee will have will be based on factors in post-hoc analysis. Right. So in case you're wondering, what does post-hoc analysis even mean? Right. So post-hoc analysis simply means that it is additional analysis that was conducted that might not have been directly connected to the hypothesis or the research questions, but still helps to clarify the context of what was found. Right. So I've got an example here. This is a data set that I obtained, I guess, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. A lot of my research focuses on perceptions of violence and mass shootings and stuff like that. So I apologize. I don't want to add any more negativity into your life. But this data set was generated that way through undergraduate participants. And I'm going to show you what kind of post-hoc analysis would look like with this particular data set. Right? So in this experiment, I was looking to see how the news source might impact how people judge the severity of the crime. Right? So it was a mass shooting. It was the same news article in every case in 4 conditions, same news article, but I varied the condition on whether it came from, say, CNN or Fox News or Associated Press or whatever, right? Just to see if it would change people's perception of the nature of the crime, right? And the cause of the crime, as well as the possible punishment for the perpetrator, right? Long story short, it did, right? But my main hypotheses had to do with how does the news source impact our perception of the crime and the perpetrator. Okay, so that's where my hypothesis went, right? So almost all of my analysis to begin with was devoted to that, right? And that's just our regular analysis. That's normal. I'm not going to guide you through all of that because we don't have that kind of time, right? However, if you were sitting there, and you have to kind of put yourself in the mindset of the committee, right? If you were sitting there listening to my presentation about this sort of thing and say, oh yeah, you know, the news source seemed to have a significant effect on how they judge the perpetrator, right? Your mind might start to think, well, does the race of the participant matter? Does race affect it? Or what about their preferred news source? Or what if their political views affected it? What if it wasn't the news source at all? It was actually their political views, right? All these questions your brain might go to. What if it was the race of the participant or the perpetrator, excuse me, right? Is it male versus female? Is there different analyses that way? And I'm so glad you thought of that because yes, that is the nature of post-hoc analysis. Right, so we're not actually, I didn't make any hypotheses about any of those factors, but utilizing the demographics in this piece of research helps me do that post-hoc analysis that answers many of those questions before they're even asked, right? And I'm going to let you on a little secret here. I'm getting close so nobody can hear, okay? If you provide all of the answers for your committee before they can ask the questions, you win. I mean, like, that's usually what they're trying to do. Is not that they're trying to call you out or anything like that, but they're trying to find certain things that maybe you didn't consider and say, hey, well, what about this? Maybe you should consider this, right? But if you considered them all, just saying, you hold all the keys to all the doors. So anyway, now that we've got that little secret out there, if we look at this data here, right, and I've got kind of it's a relatively small data set, but what I would suggest, this is my tip to you, is you want to ask a lot of demographic questions at the end of your study, right? So you might think, well, I don't care about the participants being male or female. That's not part of my hypotheses. Doesn't matter. It might be a relevant post-hoc analysis that will shed more light on this particular topic, right? So, for example, I asked participants, if you look here, I'll use my cursor because you can't see where I'm pointing. I asked participants if they believed gun control, immigration, mental health, religion, video games, and pornography had a causational role in mass shootings. Right, like the example that we talk about in this study. I asked them if they thought these things. What's interesting, and even though I don't hypothesize on it, women seemed to suggest that gun control was a much more important factor in this, in terms of causation, whereas men seemed to point more towards mental health and not hardly at all towards gun control. And so this is an interesting gender sort of effect where we see men almost defending guns or gun ownership anyway, whereas women are quite a bit quicker to go the other direction with it and say, hey, yeah, no, if we were better at, preventing guns from being purchased or whatever, we might reduce this or whatever, right? And I'm not going to politicize this because that's not the point. The data is the data, right? But I have all these different demographic questions. So biological sex, we saw an effect there. Age actually didn't have an effect. And when you're sampling only undergraduates, for example, age is kind of a moot point. If you wanted to leave one of these out, age can go, because if you're sampling undergraduate population, they're going to be between 18 and 21 90% of the time. So it's not really an important factor that much. However, and these are ones I would really suggest. Where did I go? I skipped too far ahead. Oh, no, there it is, right there. Political identity, right? So when we talk about our political identity, I actually like to use a slider scale where you've got Republican on one end and Democrat on the other, and they can slide their the cursor to wherever they want it to be. So they might say, oh, I lean Democrat, but I'm not like hardcore Democrat, or, whatever. Either way. We can also ask them about their political leanings in terms of conservative versus liberal. Oh, sorry, my cat just climbed in my lap. See, so here's my cat. Here's my cat. One of our cats. We have 4 because we're crazy. But you can ask all these demographic questions because, to me, these are all things that would come up afterwards. Is, okay, well, how does their political perspective impact how they perceive this, right? How does their religion? I even ask religion. Is your religious perspective an important part of how you feel about violent crime, right? So all of these, race and ethnicity is especially because it's such a salient social issue at the moment, and has been for quite some time, not just right now, of course. But people's perspective on many things is impacted by how they identify racially and ethnically, right? And you might think, ooh, you know what? I don't really want to ask them personal questions. I understand. I get that, especially given the social political climate at the moment. But they sign an informed consent, and if they choose not to participate, that's perfectly all right. But of the participants that are in it, I think that's a very good amount of information, because now you can go back and analyze this. You can run your t-test for race or for gender. You can run your ANOVA for race and ethnicity. All of these you can utilize as a post-hoc analysis. And what you're trying to do, I love this phrase, you're trying to give meaning to the narrative, right? It's not just about, this is what the data indicates, right? It is, this is what we think it means. And I qualify it, what I think it means. But you get a better idea of what it means when you can analyze it using these post hoc analyses. And they're worth their weight in gold, because what you could do, a lot of times your committee might say, did men think differently than women? And you can say, as a matter of fact, a post hoc analysis indicated yada, 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 yada. And all you're doing is winning brownie points, looking like you know your stuff. Because you do, of course. You'll know your stuff very well at that point. But it's just a good way to provide a better answer to the questions that you'll inevitably be asked. So I can't emphasize this enough. With post hoc analysis, it's just money in the bank. It's like a 401k. Oh my gosh, my cat tried to jump but missed and scratched the heck out of me. Sorry, that's very unprofessional. It's like a 401k. You put this stuff aside, and then when you need it, it's there. Okay. So as I said, post hoc analysis is really good stuff. They don't require hypotheses. They don't require research questions. So not a lot of investment on the front half, but very, very useful on the back end. And what I would suggest too, by the way, is utilizing this when deciding what future research would look like. So you might say, well, this study seemed to indicate that men felt differently than women. So a future study might blah, 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 blah. And you've got good content for chapter 5, because that's something, of course, you have to address in the discussion chapter near the end of your thesis. So yay, post hoc analysis. Boo for big, nasty cat scratches on my legs.